You're out there sitting on the ice. It's dead quiet. Your fish finder is lit up, showing fish right under your hole. You can practically see them down there, but they just won't bite. What if I told you the very thing connecting you to your lure is the exact reason they're ignoring it? Today we are talking about fishing line thickness for January ice fishing. And no, this isn't going to be the same old go thinner in winter advice that everybody parrots. I am going to show you why the line you are using right now, even if you think it's thin, might be the biggest mistake you are making on the ice this season. The reason has to do with water clarity, a fish's slow metabolism, and a tiny detail on the spool that most anglers completely overlook. This one change could transform your catch rate overnight. So, before we get into it, do me a favor and drop a comment right now. What line diameter are you currently using for your main ice fishing setup? Let's see who's already cracked the code. For decades, the wisdom passed down from one generation of ice anglers to the next has been pretty straightforward. Winter water is clear, fish are sluggish, so you have to use a thinner line. It makes perfect sense on the surface, doesn't it? We hear it, we nod, and we don't question it. We walk into the tackle shop, grab a spool of 4-pound or maybe 6-pound test, and we feel confident that we've made the right choice for the hard water season. It's a habit, a comfortable and familiar ritual. The problem is that general advice is dangerously incomplete. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's missing the most critical details. Fish behavior, water conditions, and especially the incredible sensitivity of our modern gear have all evolved. That old reliable line thickness, the one that feels safe and strong, might actually be the invisible wall between you and the fish. It's time we move past the simple rule of thumb and looked at what's really happening below the ice. Let's start by challenging a core belief. We all say that winter water is clear. But that word doesn't do it justice. It's not just clear, it's sterile. In summer, the water is full of suspended algae, sediment, and microorganisms, creating a sort of visual noise that helps camouflage your line. Come January, all of that has settled or died off. The water column becomes almost optically perfect. Sunlight, even on an overcast day, penetrates deeper and with more intensity than you realize. Think of it like looking through a perfectly clean window versus a slightly dusty one. Every single imperfection stands out. Your fishing line, cutting down through that sterile water, isn't just a thin strand anymore. It's a stark foreign object casting a tiny but sharp shadow, refracting light in a way that nothing natural does. It's an unnatural line drawn in a perfect environment, and any fish that's been around for more than a season has learned to associate that unnatural line with danger. We need to stop thinking clear and start thinking laboratory-grade sterile. Now, let's get inside the fish's head. During the cold of January, a fish's metabolism slows to a crawl. They aren't the aggressive, reactionary predators they are in the summer. They don't have the energy to waste chasing down a meal that might not be worth the effort. This means they are not going to just smash your bait. Instead, they approach it slowly, cautiously. Imagine a big perch or a walleye hovering just inches from your jig. It's not a split-second decision. They have time. They will stare at your offering for 10, 20, even 30 seconds. In that time, they are scrutinizing every single detail. They see the color of the jig, the movement of the bait, and yes, they absolutely see the line it's tied to. If that line looks like a thick, rigid rope leading up to the surface, their survival instincts kick in. It's a trap. A thicker line gives them all the time in the world to identify the danger and simply turn away, and you're left staring at a red mark on your sonar that just fades away, leaving you wondering what you did wrong. Here's something most anglers never even consider: the vibration signature of your line. Everything that moves in water creates a pressure wave, a vibration. A minnow's tail flickers and it sends out a natural signal. Your jig, when you twitch it, is supposed to mimic that. But a thick, stiff fishing line acts like a guitar string, transmitting unnatural, high-frequency vibrations down to the lure. Every tiny movement of your hand, every gust of wind against your rod, it all gets telegraphed down that stiff line. Imagine a spider delicately walking on its silk thread. That's how a lure should behave on an ultra-thin line. Now imagine that same spider trying to move on a thick piece of nylon rope. The movement becomes clumsy, rigid, and totally unnatural. A lethargic winterfish is highly attuned to these subtle vibrations. When it senses the wrong buzz coming from your presentation, it's an immediate red flag. The lure is no longer a potential meal, it's a noisy puppet on a string. Beyond just being visible or vibrating, a thick line acts as a physical barrier that kills your lure's action. This is especially true when you're using the small, lightweight jigs that are essential for winter fishing. Think about those tiny tungsten jigs, some weighing less than a gram. They are designed to have a specific, subtle flutter as they fall. They're meant to spiral, rock, or dart. Now, picture that delicate jig tied to a piece of 6-pound or 8-pound monofilament. The stiffness and diameter of that line act like an anchor. It completely overpowers the jig. Instead of fluttering naturally on the fall, it just plummets, held rigidly in place by the line. The subtle rocking action you try to impart with your rod tip gets absorbed and dampened by the line's memory and stiffness. You are effectively robbing the lure of its designed purpose. It's like trying to conduct a symphony orchestra with a baseball bat. You lose all the finesse, all the subtlety that is required to trigger a bite from a neutral or negative fish. Okay, so what about fluorocarbon? The marketing tells us it's virtually invisible in water because its refractive index is very close to that of water itself. And that is true to an extent. Fluorocarbon is definitely less visible than monofilament of the same diameter. But here's the trap. Less visible is not the same as invisible. In the sterile, gin-clear water of January, a thick piece of fluorocarbon is still very detectable. It may not stand out like a neon sign the way mono can, but it still creates a distortion. It still casts a shadow. It's like one of those Predator movie aliens. It's camouflaged, but you can still see the shimmering outline if you look closely. And remember, winterfish are looking very, very closely. So while switching to fluoro is a good step, it doesn't give you a free pass to use a thick, heavy line. Using a 0.20 mm fluorocarbon line is better than using a 0.20 mm monofilament, but it's still far too thick for most finesse ice fishing situations. The invisibility is an advantage, not a magic bullet that erases the laws of physics. Let's put this into a real-world scenario. Imagine you're targeting jumbo perch. You're on a good spot, marking fish consistently. You're using a small tungsten jig tipped with a wax worm. Your setup is a standard one, a rod spooled with a 5-pound test line, which has a diameter of about 0.20 millimeters. You drop your jig down and you see the fish rise up to inspect it on the sonar, then turn away. Over and over. Now, your friend next to you is using the exact same jig, the same bait, on the same spot. But he's pulling up fish after fish. What's the difference? He's using a 2-pound test line with a diameter of 0.10 millimeters. That tiny difference, just 1/10 of a millimeter, changes everything. His jig flutters more naturally on the fall. When he jiggles it, it pivots and dances freely. The line is nearly impossible to see. Your jig, on the other hand, is being choked by the thicker line, looking stiff and unnatural. The perch see the difference immediately. One looks like a free meal, the other looks like a trap. Now let's talk about the walleye problem. This is where the fear factor really kicks in for anglers. We think walleye big teeth better use a stronger line, so we spool up with 8 or even 10-pound test line, thinking we're being safe. But we are actually sabotaging ourselves before the lure even hits the water. A winter walleye is often just as finicky, if not more so, than a small perch. They are famous for their light, subtle bites. Often, they will just swim up and inhale the bait, and the only indication you get is your line going slightly slack. With a thick, stiff line, you will never feel that. Furthermore, when that walleye gently sucks in your minnow head or jig, it will immediately feel the resistance and drag of that heavy line. It feels unnatural. It's not how a real minnow would feel in its mouth. The fish's reaction is instant. It spits the hook out in a fraction of a second, long before you even realize you had a bite. You end up with stolen bait and no fish. You'd be amazed at the size of walleye that can be landed on a 4-pound test line if you have your drag set correctly. This brings us to the single most important point of this entire video. You need to completely forget about the pound test rating on the box. It is almost a meaningless number when it comes to finesse presentations. Instead, you must start looking at the diameter, which is usually listed in millimeters. Here's why. A 4-pound test line from brand A could have a diameter of 0.16 millimeters, while a 4-pound test from brand B might be 0.12 millimeters. That is a massive difference in terms of visibility and stiffness, yet they are both sold as 4-pound line. The pound test just tells you the braking strength under ideal lab conditions. It tells you nothing about how the line will perform in the water. The diameter is what dictates visibility, stiffness, and how naturally your lure will behave. From this day forward, I want you to ignore the big number on the front of the spool and find the tiny print on the side that says DIA. That is the number that truly matters in January. So, if diameter is the key, what is the magic number? Of course, it varies a little based on water clarity and the species you're targeting. But if I had to give you a sweet spot for a huge range of situations, it would be around 0.10 millimeters. This typically corresponds to a high-quality 2-pound test line, sometimes even a 1-pound test depending on the brand. A line this thin is like a ghost in the water. It is incredibly supple, allowing even the tiniest jigs to flutter and dance with maximum freedom. The sensitivity is off the charts. You can feel a fish breathing on your bait. For panfish like crappie and bluegill, this is an absolute game changer. For perch, it's often the difference between getting bites and not. Even for walleye, using a leader of this diameter can dramatically increase your hookup ratio on those super tough, high-pressure days. It might feel scary at first, but once you experience the difference in the number of bites you get, you will never want to go back to your old thick line again. Now you might be thinking, do I really have to re-spool all of my reels with this super thin, expensive line? And the answer is no, you don't. This is where the power of the leader comes into play. You can keep your main line, say, a 6-pound test braid or monofilament, which is easy to handle with cold hands, and then attach a leader of ultra-thin fluorocarbon. A 3 to 4 foot section is usually perfect. This gives you the best of both worlds. You have a manageable main line, but the crucial final connection to your lure is that nearly invisible, super supple 0.10 or 0.12 millimeter fluorocarbon. The fish only sees the leader, and it is so thin that it doesn't impede the lure's action. This is the single most effective tactic used by professional ice anglers. It saves money, it's efficient, and it gives you the ultimate stealth presentation without sacrificing the manageability of your main line. If you take only one thing away from this video, it should be to start using thin fluorocarbon leaders. However, there is a catch. When you are connecting a thin leader to a thicker main line, your knot becomes absolutely critical. A poorly tied knot is the weakest link in your entire system and will fail you at the worst possible moment. The standard clinch knot, or Palomar knot, that you might use to tie on a lure is not the right choice for this connection. You need a specific line-to-line knot that is both incredibly strong and slim enough to pass through the guides on your rod without catching. The two best knots for this job are the double uni knot and the FG knot. The double uni is easier to tie in the cold with gloves on. The FG knot is slimmer and arguably stronger, but it takes a lot more practice to master. I strongly urge you to go online, watch a few tutorials on how to tie the double uni knot, and practice it at home until you can do it with your eyes closed. Your success with thin leaders depends almost entirely on your ability to tie a reliable connection knot. You also can't just put this ultra-thin line on any old rod and reel. Your equipment has to work as a balanced system. Using a 2-pound test line on a stiff, heavy-action rod is a recipe for disaster. You will break off on the hook set almost every single time. To properly fish with these finesse lines, you need an ice rod with a very soft, sensitive tip. This soft tip acts as a shock absorber. When a fish bites, the tip bends and protects the fine line from the sudden pressure of the hook set. It cushions the fight. Equally important is your reel's drag system. The drag must be incredibly smooth. A cheap reel with a jerky, inconsistent drag will cause the line to snap the instant a big fish makes a sudden run. Before you hit the ice, set your drag very light. You should be able to pull line off the spool with just a light, steady pull. You are not fighting the fish with the backbone of the rod, you are fighting it with the smooth drag of the reel, letting the fish tire itself out. Let's address the biggest reason people don't downsize their line, the mental barrier. It's fear. We are terrified of breaking off and losing that one giant fish of the day, or maybe even the season. It's a valid concern, but the logic is flawed. Let me ask you this. What is better? To use a heavy 8-pound test line, get only one bite all day from a truly aggressive fish, and land it? Or to use a thin 2-pound test line, get 10 bites from those finicky, neutral fish, and maybe lose one of them because you made a mistake? I will take the 9 fish in the bucket every single time. You have to shift your mindset. The goal isn't just to land every fish you hook. The goal is to get more bites in the first place. You can't catch what doesn't bite. Overcoming that fear of breaking off and trusting your equipment, your smooth drag, and your soft rod tip is a huge step in becoming a more successful winter angler. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, right? The same applies to fishing. Now, with all that said, are there any exceptions? Are there times when a thicker line is the right choice? Absolutely. This is not a one-size-fits-all rule. For example, if you are fishing in extremely murky or stained water, where visibility is only a few inches, the visual aspect of the line becomes much less important. In that case, you can get away with a heavier line. Another key exception is when you are targeting monster lake trout in very deep water, say over 80 feet. Here, you're often using heavy, aggressive lures, and the fish are typically very powerful. More importantly, you are fishing around jagged rocks and sharp edges, where abrasion resistance becomes the number one priority. In this scenario, using a 10 or 12-pound test leader makes perfect sense because it can withstand being scraped against a rock during a long fight. The key is to analyze your specific situation, the water clarity, the target species, and the structure you are fishing around. For the vast majority of typical January fishing for perch, crappie, and walleye, however, thinner is almost always better. If you are still not convinced, here is a simple experiment you can do at home that will make you a believer. Go find a tall clear glass or vase and fill it with water. Now, take one of your favorite tiny tungsten ice jigs. First, tie it to a piece of your usual fishing line, say a 6-pound Tess monofilament. Hold the line and drop the jig into the glass. Watch it fall. See how it kind of just plummets held rigidly by the stiff line? Now cut that line off and tie the exact same jig to a piece of 2-pound test, 0.10mm line. Drop it in the glass again. The difference will be astonishing. You will see the jig flutter, rock and spiral as it sinks, completely free and unrestricted. It looks alive. That is the action that fish want to see. That is the natural presentation you have been missing out on. This simple visual demonstration is often the aha moment for many anglers. You are seeing with your own eyes how much your line choice is dictating the lure's performance. Another practical reason to go thinner in January is line memory, especially in the extreme cold. Line memory refers to the tendency of a line, particularly monofilament, to retain the shape of the spool it was stored on. Thicker lines have much more memory. When you reel up, the line comes off in tight, stiff coils. These coils refuse to straighten out in the cold, creating a slinky effect between your rod tip and the water. This does two terrible things. First, it kills your presentation. Your jig will not hang vertically, it will be pulled sideways by the coiling line. Second, and more importantly, it absolutely destroys your sensitivity. A subtle bite has to pull against all that coiled tension before you even have a chance of feeling it. A thin, supple line has far less memory. It comes off the spool much straighter, giving you a direct, sensitive connection to your lure. It's the difference between trying to feel a tap through a steel rod versus a wet noodle. Let's talk more about that sensitivity. Reading the bite in winter is an art form. It's often not the aggressive thump you feel in the summer. Sometimes it's just a slight tick. Sometimes the line just feels a little heavy, as if it has picked up a piece of a weed. Other times you'll see the line go completely slack as a fish inhales the lure and swims upwards with it. With a thick, stiff line that has a lot of stretch and memory, you will miss 90% of these subtle cues. The line acts as a buffer, absorbing all of the most delicate information. An ultra-thin, low-stretch line, especially when paired with a sensitive graphite rod, is like a direct extension of your nervous system. You feel everything. You feel your jig ticking the bottom. You feel the faint vibration of a nearby fish's fins, and you most certainly feel that almost imperceptible tick when a finicky crappie finally decides to bite. This heightened sense of feel will, without a doubt, help you convert more lookers into fish on the ice. So, I want to issue you a challenge. The next time you go out on the ice, perform this simple on-the-water experiment. Rig up 2 identical rods with 2 identical lures. On the first rod, spool it with your usual go-to line, whatever you have been using for years. On the second rod, put on a line that has half the diameter of your usual choice. For example, if you normally use a 0.20 mm line, spool the second one up with 0.10 mm line. Fish these 2 rods side by side. Drop them down the same hole, or in 2 holes right next to each other. Pay close attention. Which rod gets more looks on the sonar? Which one gets more bites? Which one actually hooks up with fish? I am willing to bet that after an hour or 2, the results will be overwhelmingly in favor of the thinner line. There is no substitute for seeing the proof for yourself. This simple test will erase any lingering doubts you might have and will likely change the way you fish for good. Finally, let's briefly touch on the cost versus the reward. Yes, high quality, thin diameter fluorocarbon or copolymer lines can be more expensive than a bulk spool of standard monofilament. It can feel like a big investment for something that seems so small, but you have to think about it differently. How much money did you spend on your auger, your fish finder, your shelter, your gas to get to the lake? You've invested hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars in equipment to help you find fish. So why would you compromise on the single most important link between you and that fish? Spending an extra $10 or $15 on a spool of premium thin diameter line that will last you the whole season is one of the single most effective upgrades you can make. What is a successful, enjoyable day on the ice worth to you? Is it worth the price of a couple of fancy coffees? When you reframe it that way, investing in the right line isn't an expense. It's a critical investment in your success and enjoyment. The final paradigm shift I want you to make is this. Your success in January is not about overpowering the fish. It is 100% about deception and presentation. You have to move away from the mindset of using a line that is strong enough to winch a fish out of the hole. Instead, you need to adopt the mindset of a ninja, using a line that is so thin and invisible that it allows you to present an offering that is absolutely perfect and irresistible. Your line is not just a rope, it is an integral part of the presentation itself. In the hyper-aware, slow-motion world of a fish under the ice in January, your presentation is everything, and a thick, visible, stiff line is the fastest way to ruin a perfect presentation. Once you truly embrace this philosophy of finesse over force, you will find that your toughest days on the ice become more productive, and your good days become truly unforgettable. Trust your drag, trust your skill, and go thin. So, let's wrap this all up. We've established that it's not just about using thin line in winter, but about using a line with the correct ultra-thin diameter. We've hammered home the point that you should be looking at the millimeters on the spool, not the pound test rating. And we've hopefully shattered the myth that you need thick, heavy line to land big, toothy fish through the ice. The most critical takeaway, the real what it a poverot moment, is this. Your fishing line is not just a simple connection to your lure, it is an active and sometimes negative part of your presentation. In the sterile, crystal clear world of a January lake, a thick fishing line is like a world-class chef serving a beautiful meal on a dirty plate. The customer, in this case the fish, sees the glaring flaw and loses its appetite immediately. This one realization can fundamentally change your entire approach to ice fishing. Making the switch to a line that is just a few hundredths of a millimeter thinner will force you to become a better angler. It will teach you to trust your drag, to play fish with more finesse, and it will absolutely, without a doubt, result in more bites. Thank you so much for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective, do me a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content that challenges old fishing wisdom. And now for my final question to you. What's the biggest fish you have ever landed on surprisingly thin line? Share your story in the comments below. Let's hear those epic finesse fishing battles.